Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, students. In the last lecture, we were discussing about the chapter number 10, that is the accruals and prepayments. So in accruals, so we have accrued expense. So accrued expense means that is expenses incurred but we not yet paid. For example, the unpaid electricity bill. So accrued expense is our liability. Okay. Okay. So the second one is accrued income. So accrued income is an assets because in accrued income we earn the income but not received. So it's income earned, not received. So it is actually the income earned. We earned the income. We earned the income. So the next is the prepaid expense. So prepaid expense is an asset because in the prepaid expense paid but not yet incurred. It's mean we paid some amount in advance, but that expense is not incurred yet. So the example is we paid advance rent, we paid advance fee in school or in college, etc. So the fourth one is unearned income. So unearned income is our liability because we received the income in advance but didn't earn it yet. So the example is amount something received in advance. So now we are going to open the ledger T account of the two expenses, accrued expenses and the prepaid expenses first. So here is the format of firstly we will make a format, a separate format, then I will make the combine account. So the first one is related to the accrued expense, then I will teach you how to make the prepaid expense account. So accrued expense account will be the okay. So the first one, this one is the accrued expense. Accrued expense. So as you know that the accrued expense is our liability. Accrued expense is our liability. So the nature of accrued expense is liability. So we will treat it as a liability. Accrued expense account. So what is the opening balance of liability? So in case of accrued expense, okay. So what is the BD balance? So the BD balance will be the on credit side because accrued expense is the credit nature or the liability nature. So here is the amount BD, that is the, you can see the opening payable, that is the opening payable. Okay, will be written on the credit side, and the closing CD, that is the closing payable. Here is the opening payable, CD is the closing payable. Closing payable. Okay, so now in case of cash paid, so the cash paid will be the written on the debit side. Why it is written on the debit side? Because in case of accrued expense, if we paid the cash, so what entry we will pass in case of expense paid? So the payable will debit and expense paid is credit. Okay, so here is journal entry related to the expense. So journal entries, we can also talk about the journal entries. So in case of, you can say, in case of payment of an expense, so what entry we will pass in case of expense? For example, $100 expense is paid. So what is the entry of this transaction? Yes, can you tell me? Yes, expense debit and cash credit. So this is an entry in case of expense paid. Okay. Okay. So we have three journal entries related to this transactions. Journal entries. The first journal entry in case of payment, on payment of expense. The first journal entry will relate on payment of an expense. On payment of an expense which is happened during the period, during accounting period. So what entry we will pass? So the entry will be the expense account debit, expense account debit, and the cash or bank credit. Okay. So okay. So the next journal entry relate to this concept is the period and adjustment for expense incurred but not yet paid. So this is the actually the we are talking about the entry related to accrued expense. Entry related to accrued expense. Period and adjustment. Period and adjustment for expense incurred. It means expense has already been incurred but not yet paid. But not yet paid. So it's an journal entry related to the accrued expense. So the entry related to the accrued expense. Accrued expense. So what entry will we pass in this case? If expense incurred but we didn't pay any amount. So it's mean yes, yes. It's mean due to incurrence of an expense, so the expense account will be the debit. There is no question on it because expense incurred, so we debit the expense. Okay. And the second one is not paid any amount, so it showed that nothing will be the credit. So cash will not be the credit because we didn't pay any amount. So it's mean we incurred the expense and not paid the amount, so it's mean it's our liability to pay the amount. So we will record the liability. So we will record the accrued expense. Accrued expense will be the credit. Accrued expense account will be the credit. So this entry we will pass in case of accrued expense. So expense debit and accrued expense is our liability. So we will create our liability. Got it? Okay. So what happened at the start of next accounting period? What happened? So for example, these entries are related to the you can say accounting period 2024. Okay, and this entry period and adjustment entry will be the 31st December 24. So what entry will we pass in case of the next you can say the counting period? The next accounting period will be the for example start at 1st Jan 25. So what entry we will pass at start of next accounting year? The third one, at start of next accounting period. So what entry, what adjustment we will make? Okay, good. We will reverse the period and adjustment. We will reverse the last period and adjustment. Last period and we will reverse the last period and adjustment. So what entry we pass in the closing period? That expense is debit and accrued expense is credit. So in the next year, this entry will be the reversed. So we will pass because the closing will be the opening of the next year. So we will pass the accrued expense will be debit and the expense will be the credit. Expense account will be the credit. So these are the journal entry which normally we will use in this chapter. Okay. So now I am talking about this one, cash paid. So what is the amount of, what is the entry of this one? So in case of this one, so in case of this one, in case of payment of cash, so the accrued expense will be the debit. So the accrued expense will be the debit and cash will be the uh, credit. Okay. So in case of payment of an expense. Okay. So the remaining balance will go to the income statement as an expense. So the balancing amount will goes to the profit and loss account as an expense. Balance will be goes to the profit and loss account as an expense. So this balancing figure we will record as an expense in profit and loss account. So this is the format of accrued expense. And what is the format of prepaid expense? So in case of prepaid expense, in case of prepaid expense account, as you know that the accrued expense is our liability, but the prepaid expense is our asset. So the balance of this prepaid expense will be the here. So here is the opening BD, opening prepaid, and here is the closing prepaid, and this is the balance, you can say CD. Okay. So this is the account related to the prepaid expense. So in case of prepaid expense, the cash paid will be written on the debit side. will be written on the debit side, just like the accrued expense. So cash paid will be written here, and the remaining amount, the balancing amount will go to the profit and loss account as an expense. So this amount will go to the profit and loss account as an expense, and this cash paid, we see in the trial balance. So this cash base related to, we can see this cash paid amount in trial balance. In trial balance, we can see this amount, and cash paid we can see in trial balance, because this cash paid amount come from the trial balance. And this the green one is a balancing amount will go to the profit and loss account when we are making the income statement or statement of profit and loss account. So this is the separate format of accrued expense and prepaid expense. Just look at these account, then we'll go further. Okay, just revise it. Okay, so you have revised it. Okay, so in case of, these are the journal entry related to the accrued expense. So journal entry related to the accrued expense. Okay. So what if we make the journal entries related to the prepaid expense? So what kind of journal entry will paid? So the first one will be the uh, on payment of expense during the year. So what entry we will make in case of prepaid expense? So the first entry will remain same. The first entry will remain same in case of you can say the prepaid expense account also. Okay, so this journal entry related to the prepaid expense. Prepaid. So the first entry will be the same in case of uh, payment of an expense. In case of payment of an expense, so the expense debit, cash credit. The first entry will be remain same. Expense debit and cash credit. So the first entry will be the same. So what is the second entry? Second entry will be the period and adjustment for expense not yet incurred and paid in advance. It's mean we paid in advance but expense not incurred. Then entry will be the paid in advance but expense not incurred yet, not yet incurred. Okay, so what entry we will pass? So the entry will be the, in this case, prepaid expense debit, prepaid expense debit, and the expense account credit. Prepaid expense, that is an asset, is debit, and expense account is credit. So this entry we will pass in case of paid in advance but expense not yet incurred. So the amount which we paid in advance that is called prepay prepaid expense. So it will become the asset, and the expense not yet incurred. So we will never debit the expense. So this is the entry related to the you can say period end adjustment. So this is the paid in advance but not yet incurred at year end, you can say at year end. So this is the year end adjustment. So what entry we will pass in case of 2025th of the first month of the 1st Jan 2025. So what entry we will pass? So we will reverse this entry in case of next year. So the entry will be the expense account will debit and prepaid expense credit. So these are the entry, or these are the you can see the uh, trial of this one, and this ledger will be the related to the prepaid expense. So this ledger will relate to the prepaid expense, and this ledger will relate to the accrued expense. Okay, so the last will be the combined account in case of accrued and prepayment expense. So this is the, you can say, the complete format related to the accrual and prepayment. So now we are going to make the combined account of these two accounts. So you have to remember this account. Okay, so the name of this account is, you can see the just simple, the expense account, not accrued expense account, not prepayment expense account. So if we are opening the single account, if we are opening the single account, then we will write the accrued expense account, and if we are opening the single account, then we will write the prepaid expense. Now we are going to combine the account, pre accrued expense plus prepayment or prepaid expense account. So the name of this account will be the name of this account will be the only the expense account. We will not write an accrued, or you can say the prepayment expense account. So the name of this account will be the only the expense account. So the expense account. So in case of accrued, so here is the opening BD. Here is opening BD, that is the opening payable, that is on credit side, and here is the balance CD, that is the closing payable, will be written here. Okay, and here is the balance BD in case of opening prepaid, and here is a balance CD in case of closing prepaid. Okay, so the total cash paid in case of accrued and prepaid, the cash paid will be written on the debit side, cash paid, and the balancing figure and the balancing oh, sorry the balancing amount will go to the profit and loss account as an expense. So this is the a complete format related to the accrual and prepayment expense. Okay, so in this class we have discussed the format related to the accrued expense, the ledgers related to the prepaid expense, and the combined ledger of accrued and prepaid expense account. And we also discussed some journal entries related in case of journal entries related to accrued expense account, and the journal entries related to the prepaid expense. Now we have done approximate all the chapter except the accrued income and the unearned income. So in the next class we will solve some practice question. So for the next class, it will be easy for us to calculate the practice question, because we have already done the crux of this chapter. Okay. So any question, Iman, in your mind, you can ask. Okay. So you have to just try the work example 1 at your home. Work example 1, just try to solve it. If you have any problem, you can consult me. In the next class, I will also discuss all the work examples. So we already done opening, closing, accrued expense in an account. We have already done it. So you can solve work example 2 as well. So the activity 10.1, so it's easy. So the next will be the work example 3. You can solve. These are the little examples, not too much difficulty. So here is the mix examples. So in a mix example, what does it mean? Some examples related to the accruals and some are the prepayments. Okay. So now in the next class, we will discuss the questions, how the examiner asks the question related to the prepayment and the accrued expense. Okay. Okay, student. Any question? Okay. Thank you so much for joining. Allah Hafiz.